My name is Bradley and I am an alcoholic. Hi everyone, good to see everyone. So I brought my original big book today, and as you can see, it's really kind of tattered. I got it in 1984, and somebody once saw me with it and he said, "What happened? Did your dog get a hold of it?" And I said, "No. In early sobriety, I'd get angry and I would chew on it." And, this path hasn't, Bruce is rolling his eyes, thank you, Bruce. This hasn't been an easy path, but it's been my only path since January the 23rd, 1987. And I'm going to read something from it later. I'd like to find some common ground of our recovery today, and that's what I'm going to try to speak about. Thank you, Jill, for introducing me. I too was scared when I went to my first meeting. I don't know anyone that is not terrified to go to their first meeting. It may be judgmental, but if I see someone come in on their first day and they're all done up and dressed up and looking great, I'm like, oh, not yet, baby, not yet, So I grew up in Massachusetts, in the western part of the state, and my 4 grandparents were illiterate immigrants from Eastern Europe. Both my grandfathers were alcoholic. My paternal grandfather died at 41 of gangrene on the streets. It was before Alcoholics Anonymous was founded. He left 6 children, maybe more, who knows. My other grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was really wonderful to me, was a periodic drinker. My stock is Eastern European, so alcoholism and depression are in my DNA. And because of working the steps, I've eradicated that one day at a time successfully. I do get depressed once in a while, but when I do, I call my sponsor, and he usually says, "Why don't you go for a walk? You live in a lovely neighborhood. Put the leash on your dog, go for a walk." Mark C. was my sponsor, and I called him one day, and he said, "Are your draperies open?" I said, "No." He said, "Why don't you open the draperies and open the windows, even though it was like January?" It's like, just get some fresh air in that house. So I think that my solution to not drinking one day at a time, they've been really simple solutions. And I've had to learn to face whatever I'm going through in my life in little increments. As an alcoholic and coming from an alcoholic family, the solutions always had to be large and grand, but I really think they're tiny little increments. I have a sister who's considerably older than I am, and we've not spoken for over a decade. My brother was a brilliant cardiologist in Los Angeles, and he died of AIDS in 1991, that early wave of the pandemic. I'll speak about that later. My parents, they were poor kids who did real well. They were smart. My parents were so smart. My path with my father was difficult. I know that my father resented me from the time of my conception. And that's difficult to find out late in life, but I did. My mother was lovely. She was kind. She was simple. She was very consistent. And she taught me that we're all worthy of God's love. That's what I got from her. I will tell you a story. She died Thanksgiving Day many years ago, and the funeral was the day after Thanksgiving, and there was a snowstorm, and my father wanted her buried within a few days. So the day after she died, there was a wake in this town, and we drove to the funeral home, and at the front of the funeral home, there were shopping carts. There were like 3 shopping carts, and we thought that was sort of odd. And when we went in, the first people at the funeral were homeless people she had worked with, who came to pay their respects to her. It was a crazy family. It was a crazy, crazy family. Crazy stuff went on. But the outside of the house looked fabulous. You know, we had a beautiful rose garden. The lawn was perfect. You know, there were always new cars in the driveway. We were always well dressed. But it really was difficult inside the house. Let me tell you a bit about one of my favorite stories of alcoholism in my family. My maternal grandmother, every Christmas Eve, would have a party. And it was always in the kitchen, and there'd always be an empty place setting for the stranger. And I still do that today, Christmas Eve. I always set an extra place for a stranger should they wander by. And my mother's youngest brother, my Uncle Richard, he was her young gay brother. And he was in the Navy his whole life. He nearly died in the house he was born in. He died in his 90s, and he lived in that house, took care of his parents when he got out of the Navy. And he had his prized possession was this crystal punch bowl. And it was like, as a kid, it was like this big, but in fact, it probably wasn't. And he would make his special punch, which had vodka in it, I think, and pineapple juice and orange soda, and had cherries floating in it, and a half gallon of sherbet. And my mother would always say, "Rit, do not give any of that to the kids." Well, of course he would. He would like scoop it out, and And this went on for years. And one Christmas, word came the day before Christmas that he dropped the punch bowl and it shattered. And my mother was like, oh, "Thank goodness." So we show up at the house for Christmas Eve dinner, and my grandmother had 2 sinks. She had a double sink. So he cleaned out one of the sinks and stopped it up, and he made the punch in the sink. And the highlight was he could do 2 flavors of sherbet because it was big enough to float 2 half gallons of sherbet. When I was a teenager, when I was 13, 14, I was sent to a boarding school. My parents' education was always important for their children, whatever they wanted. Whatever school we wanted to go to, we went to. And so I went to an all-boys school, Deerfield Academy. It's in the Connecticut River Valley. It was founded in 1792. And there were 600 boys, and it's 9th through 12th grade. And it was a really wonderful, rigorous education because I got out of that family, that daily craziness. And all the schoolmasters and their wives were so kind to me. And it really opened my eyes for a lot of things. My favorite classes, of course, were art and math, English. I learned to speak, write, English well there. And I also learned I really liked looking at the other boys. I really liked that. I went back for my 25th reunion, and all of my sort of preferences of what I like, it all came to fruition because a lot of them, they were cute and they got really handsome as they got older. It's interesting. Since then I thought I was the only gay kid in the school, but I know now there were other gay kids in the school. I have contact with one of them who's retired to Provincetown, and it was a good experience for me. I will tell you that I was always a little out of it. I did not drink. I smoked a joint or 2 there, but you could be expelled for smoking a cigarette. So I didn't do that. But I was always out of it. It occurred to me that I really didn't need to drink to be just out in left field most of the time. 1975, I was a senior, and I took the bus to Boston, which is about 100 miles away. And what I will share with you is never ever give your wallet to the gypsies to bless your money, whatever you do. You know, I was just out of it. I graduated, and I was admitted to. I knew I could not spend another summer under my parents' roof, and so I got on with their approval. I got on a bus, and I moved to Boston for the summer, and just hung out in Boston. And I had been admitted to the first class for men at Vassar College, and for whatever reason, I decided to take a year off, and I was a legal gopher before fax machines. There was a copier. It was the size of like 5 Volkswagens. It was huge, and it took forever to make a copy. There were no computers. All the typewriters had ribbon. If you're young, you may not know what that is, but it was this sticky, spoolie thing, and if you made a mistake, you had to get white out and paint on it, which was invented in North Dallas, by the way, white out. I ended up spending a year in Switzerland going to school, and then ended up going to Duke University. And I will tell you that when I was at boarding school, I went to the minister of the school, and I knew I was gay, and I didn't tell him that, but I said, I really need to see a psychiatrist. And he said, are you going to harm yourself? And I said, no, I just need a psychiatrist. So they sent me to a psychiatrist in Boston, and I went in to see him, and I said, you know, I think I'm homosexual. And he said, no, you're not. And I spent, you know, I was in Freudian psychiatry for over a year. That's the reason I stayed in Boston. Went to Duke University. You know, I never trusted all male secret societies, so I didn't join a fraternity, but I had fraternity friends. I hung out with, my therapist, psychiatrist there suggested I get a job while I was in college, so I worked in the dining hall, and I befriended all the people who worked in the dining hall. So, you know, one summer we had a fabulous Saturday picking cotton. It's a horrible, horrible thing to pick cotton. It was not pleasant at all. Christmas, 1979, my father said to me, you're graduating from college in a few months. What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And he said, you better figure it out. I was the person who was supposed to take over a family business, and I knew I could not do that. So I went to the placement office, and I spoke to them, and they were like, you know, I heard it there for the first time, but I've heard it many times in my life. You're a square peg in a round hole. We don't know what to do with you. They sent me to the head of college placement, and she spoke to me for a few minutes, and she said, Bradley, I have a career for you, and I have an employer for you. Retail, I'm going to call Neiman Marcus in Dallas, Texas. They're going to interview, and they're going to hire you. And sure enough, she called, they interviewed me, they came, and they hired me, and that's how I got to Dallas. I arrived with a blue Audi Fox in June. It was really hot. I was pulling a U-Haul because I had bought an antique sofa in Charleston, South Carolina. I still have it in storage. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what the storage bills run in the last 15 years. And I will tell you, you know, I liked Dallas because it was foreign to me. The day I arrived in Dallas, there was Catholic Charities used to be on Oaklawn Avenue. They may still be. And the Klan was protesting. I'd never seen that before. And that just terrified me. It's like, what's going on? But that was my arrival. And I worked at Neiman Marcus. I did well. I've always been able to pull the wool over people's eyes, so I got promotions. But I started drinking. So 1980, I had a neighbor, Stan. He may be in the program or not. And we went out to a Saturday night to a club that was opening called 80. And it was the night it opened. There weren't many people there. And at about 11:40, he said, "We have to go. They're going to play my song at the disco." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "At the Village Station." I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "It's a bar. Have you heard of it?" I said, "No." He said, and he asked me all these questions, other bars. And he said, "Are you gay?" I said, "No, I don't think so." So he said, "Well, if you ever want to go, you knock on my door and I'll take you." And I said, "Well, what about tonight?" So a few minutes before midnight, we pull up, we find a parking place, we walk in, and in a few minutes, Diana Ross, Upside Down, comes on, and that was his song. And whenever I hear it, I thank Stan, thank you, Stan B, wherever you are today. I didn't drink. I wasn't a drinker. And somebody said, "What would you like to drink?" And I thought, well, I'm from Cape Cod. I'll have a Cape Cod. And everyone I knew was at the bar. Even the heterosexuals I knew were at the bar that night. And that set off, I went to bars every night. Every night. How old was I? I was like 23. I was 23, If you're, I don't know if anyone's young out there. If you're young, enjoy it, because as you get older, you just want to be in bed when the sun goes down. You're just like, And so I did really well. I had a wonderful boyfriend who adored me, but I drank, and I started doing drugs. I had a friend, Henry Oliver. He's gone now. And, it was a good time. Some people may know Quinn Boardman. He's gone now. Oh, I see someone. I see Alan. So Alan was at Quinn Boardman's apartment in August of 1980. The night before, I went to the Village Station, and Quinn Boardman, he was mixing drinks, and I think I had like a tab. He had tab, and he said, "There's ice in the freezer," and I opened the freezer, and there was a little bottle, and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "They're poppers, girl." And I'm like, "What are they?" And he goes, "Are they like bitters?" He goes, "No, you inhale them." And he opened the bottle, he took it, and he gave me a hit of poppers. And I retired to the living room with the bottle, and I just did them all night, looking around. And for the next 7 years, I tried to replicate that feeling of, and I moved from tab to whatever he was serving, scotch or something. I tried to replicate that feeling almost every night. And I had those early feelings when I drank and used drugs that I tried to replicate for a long time. So I end up living in New York City. And so a few days ago, I went to Hunky's. And, I was chatting with the busboy, who's that older Hispanic man who always has the sequence fingernails, and when you put your food down, he always taps them so you can see his fingernails. And I said, "How are you doing today?" And if this weren't on, he said to me, "Today's a shit show." And he walked away. And that's what my life had become in New York. Night had become day, day had become night. The people that were trying to help me, I thought were trying to hurt me. The people that really didn't have my best interests at heart, I thought were my best friends. I was living in a high-rise studio overlooking Central Park on the 28th floor. I had become unemployable. I had creepy crawlies. I was imagining things, and I had a twin bed pushed up against the window that had a view of Central Park, which was really an extraordinary view. And I had fancy sheets, And when I finally stopped drinking, if you held the sheets up, it was like the Shroud of Turin. The alcohol had deteriorated the sheets. I still have the pillowcase. That sometimes I cover my dog's bed in. So in New York, I had worked at Bloomingdale's, and I met a man, Patrick L. And Patrick got sober in Ohio. He was probably 15 or 16. His parents were really kind to him when he got sober. They let him sleep in the back of the garage, and they hooked up a hose to the hot water in his parents' master bedroom, and they put it out the window so he could bathe outside. They wouldn't let him in the house. And Patrick, some people in the room know Patrick. He's a handsome man. Still, at 60, he's a stunning man. And he was sober. And he would invite me to these parties with his older boyfriend, and everyone was so boring because nobody drank. A Saturday night, and nobody was drinking. And one day, I knocked on Patrick's door, which you don't do in New York. You just don't show up at someone's apartment. And I'm like, "Hey, Patrick, can I come in? How's your program going?" And he looked at me in the eye and said, "Do you have a problem with alcohol?" And I said, "No." Idiot, no. He asked me a second time, "Do you have a problem with alcohol?" And I said, "No, I have a problem with cocaine." It was New York in the 80s. He asked me a third time, "Do you have a problem with alcohol?" And I started crying. And he said, "Would you like to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous?" I said, "Yes." I thought we were going to be on the boat, the Staten Island ferry to Staten Island. And I didn't know that there were hundreds of meetings in Manhattan, hundreds of meetings. And within 20 minutes, I was at a meeting called the Red Door in the Village. And it was a tiny room and packed with chairs. It was bitter cold, by the way. It was bitter, bitter cold. And we walked in, and Patrick's boyfriend, Adrian, was there. Adrian spoke at our roundup in the early 90s. And he said, "Girl, I'm so happy to see you. We've worked on you for 3 years." And there was a card table where the speaker sat, and there were things right in front of it. People had blocked out their seats. And, he motioned to somebody, and they came and they took their belongings, and they put me right in front of the speaker. And it was a man, John. He was about my age. He was adorable, well-dressed with a blazer, from North Carolina, where I went to school. He was an artist. He was getting a master's at NYU in oil painting. And he started telling his story. And I was so out of it. From my last night of drinking that I did not realize he had thalidomide arms. So his mother took the drug thalidomide when she was pregnant. He was born with stub arms. And you still see some people, most of them are in their 60s now. And he started talking about, he would be at a bar, and he'd be on a bar stool, and he'd have a drink, and he would take that drink, and his fingertips would begin to tingle. And the second drink, his arms would begin to tingle. And the third drink, he was sure his arms were growing and his fingers were growing. And by the fourth or fifth drink, he had arms like everyone else. And he said, "Alcohol deceived me." And when he said that, I thought, oh yeah, alcohol has deceived me. I've never forgotten that. My first meeting, by the time I left, there were homeless people who were not necessarily trying to get sober. They were trying to get out of the bitter cold, and they were trying to find warm coffee and cookies. And God bless them. I realized that night that they were happier than I was. I'm living on the 28th floor of the Carnegie Mews in New York City, and they're happier than I was. And Adrian said, "Do you have any alcohol or drugs in your apartment?" I said, "Well, I think I've used all the drugs." and I think there's some alcohol. He said, I want you to pour it out when you get home. Do you need help? And I said, no, I can pour it out. And I did, except the unopened bottles. And that's a whole nother story. You know, we do the best we can. We do the best we can. And that's usually enough, you know? And he said, when you go to bed, say your prayers. When you get up, say your morning prayers. Because I was so, I mean, I had lost the ability to read. And I said, well, I've got an evening prayer, you know, what's my morning prayer? And he said, you can borrow mine. And I have borrowed it every morning since January the 24th, 1987. And it simply is, keep the first drink and drug out of my hand today. Please keep me sober today. Thank you for keeping me sober yesterday. And that's how I begin the morning. Now, I've added to that during COVID. We'll speak about that. Let me say, you know, let me speak a bit about COVID. Does anyone remember Adele's performance on SNL during COVID? Yeah. You know, yes, you know, it's like, good God, what did she do? Well, she lost like how much? She lost like 80 pounds. You know, she looked fabulous. And when I saw that, I thought, someone forgot to tell her she was supposed to stay home, be depressed, and eat nonstop. And the second thing I say when I wake up is, it's going to be a fabulous day. It's going to be a brilliant day. It's going to be a great day. It's going to be a great day. And I say that out loud. I say it to my dog, you know, and it sets the tone for my day. It's what I expect. You know, as an alcoholic, I never had expectations. And people, if you know alcoholics, you know you can't expect anything good from them often if they're drinking. But today I expect stuff from myself. I expect to have a great day. No matter what happens to me, it's my reaction. It's, you know, I'm dealing with a neighbor down the way. I'm in an association with 21 houses who intimidates, bullies, and harasses people who are different than he is. I'll put it there. And you know, he's landed on a number of us. And my deal is, I'm not going to let him poison my day. I'm not going to let him poison my day. Let me get back on track here for just a second. So I was told to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I was told to announce my day count at every meeting I went to. I was told to go to coffee afterwards. I was told to get rid of the alcohol and drugs. I did find drugs. I once found some drugs and I called my sponsor. So when I got sober, there weren't cell phones. Okay? There was not the internet. You called a landline and you hope you got them. You always carried quarters, or maybe it was dimes back then, for payphones, you know? And I said, Tim, I just found some drugs. And he had been to my apartment, he said, and so my kitchen window, there was a building below it. My other side of the apartment was on the street. He said, open your kitchen window and throw them out now. I will hold the line. Opened the window and I threw them, so they went on someone's roof. But you know, it kept me from doing that. I will tell you that my first few weeks of recovery, I did have a drink in my hand and smelled it. But that voice said, no, not today, not today. I know that there are people in this room who probably have relapsed. I think that is part of the process for a lot of people. I'm not one of those people. I was so terrified and I was so sick and tired of what alcohol had done to me. I do know that in the United Kingdom, when somebody has a slip, they call it a confirmation. I don't think anyone comes back from a slip and says, it was fabulous, you know. So I went to meetings, and sometimes I went to more than one meeting a day. Not because, well, it's because I had nowhere else to go. I was unemployable, you know. When I got sober, I couldn't take the subway anymore. I was terrified of the subway. And so I would get in a cab, and then after the meeting, they'd find a cab for me to send me home. That's gone away. I love the subway now. And I just did it, you know, I just did it. It wasn't easy. I was going to hear, we had different words then too. We had mocus, which was kind of like mucky and out of focus. So newcomers were mocus. They would call me a pigeon. Newcomers were called pigeons. I guess because, I don't know, they're all lined up or something, I don't know. And I learned how to interact with people in AA, and I still do. There are people in Alcoholics Anonymous I do not like. I love them, but I do not like them. So I'm walking in a little snowstorm up Madison Avenue to go to a meeting, and I walked by a bookstore. There used to be independent booksellers in New York, and it was Isadore Duncan, the dancer. It was her biography, and they had like 10 of them in the window, and it's called What Fresh New Hell Is This? And, you know, I have days, it's like, what fresh new hell is this? You know, I'm working on a remodel of the house because of snow damage, water freeze damage. And, you know, every day it's, oh, what new fresh hell is this? At that meeting, by the way, the person spoke, and during their share from the podium, a cup of coffee with a lid came flying from the back of the room and splattered on the wall behind her. And it was one of the homeless people. And all the other homeless people were pointing so that they wouldn't be thrown out. You know, they were pointing at the perpetrator of the flying coffee. So I rebuilt my life slowly. I kept going to meetings. I went to a meeting a day. I don't want to scare you. I went to a meeting a day for probably 22 years. Not because I thought I was going to drink every day, but I didn't know when that urge was going to come. And every now and then I think about it. But I also think what it will cost me, what I will lose. And I will be honest, there was one day I thought about it, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go back to that Lambda group, and so-and-so is going to be chairing the meeting, and they're going to give me that desireship. See, one of those people I love, you know? I don't like them, but I love them. So I start selling real estate in New York. I do well. I develop a life, and I have this craving for, I was mugged twice. The late 80s in New York were really desperate time. They were a desperate time in New York City. I'd been mugged twice in the daytime in work drag, a suit. And I had a really good spring, and I thought, if I don't leave this city, I'm going to spend all this money or I'm going to get killed. And so I decided to come back to Dallas for a year or two. That was 31 years ago. I'm still here. You know, we alcoholics, we like our rituals, we like our ruts. So what's going on today with me? For a long time in my life, I thought I thought I had certain things. You know, I had a relationship, I had a business that was doing well, I was part of a spiritual community I loved, and you know, the relationship ended. I closed the business 2 years ago. It stopped being fun, and Alcoholics Anonymous, for me, is a bridge back to life. It's not a tunnel. I did not get sober to wear dark clothes and moan and be sad. And my business stopped giving me joy. It stopped giving me joy. It stopped drawing me to it in the morning. In the spiritual community, the church that I belonged to, I fell away from it. It stopped nourishing my soul. I went 3 years ago, a series of events. There was a man who came to Lambda who could not get sober. He disappears. He shows up years later in San Francisco, and he's a verger at Grace Cathedral, and he's sober. And John G. And so whenever I go to San Francisco, I have dinner or coffee with John G. And I went to a Christmas concert, and we had coffee afterwards, and in the coffee house walks this kind of hip guy, and he is a canon at Grace Cathedral. If you don't know, he's the canon of formation, canons of formation in that church. If somebody comes to it and says, "Can two women get married?" He studies it, and he says, "Yes, two women can get married." Can a gay man marry his dog? Probably not. And he left, he came back, and he said, "I'm leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. You'd be a good addition to our mix. There are no spaces, but if you'd like to, here's my card. I'll find a place for you." So I said, "Well, I'm not Episcopalian." He said, "I know that. That's why I said you'd be a good addition to our mix." And then I said, "I'm not from the Bay Area. I'm from Texas." He said, "Yes, I know. That's why you'd be a good addition to our mix." So I go to the Holy Land. And it was a fascinating trip. I've traveled a lot, and it was the most fascinating place I have ever been. And what I came to realize was I have a need in my life for ritual. And part of the ritual here is, when I hear how it works, it's that consistency of ritual. I do not have any connection to my birthplace or my birth family anymore, and I need that grounding. And so I joined a faith that has a lot of ritual in it. And that's, who would have thought that I would have gotten rid of all that stuff? All those things that were important to me a few years ago have no value to me now. I went out to Palm Springs, and there was a man, Don, and Don was celebrating 50 years of sobriety. And I met him in Canada at a meeting, and we went out to lunch with some people. And he's 90 years old, and he says to me, do you know what they would call you at my home group in Palm Springs?" And I said, "No." And as he pinches me, he says, "Chicken." At his 50-year speaking engagement, telling his story, at one point he said, "What I want to do to be in my 70s again." And that blew me away. It's all relative. Life is so relative. It's just all relative, and that to me is remarkable. This program gives me hope that when I am near the end of my life, I'm not going to have regrets. I'm not going to be thinking, "Gee, I wish I'd gotten off that bar stool." I got off the bar stool. We've all gotten off the bar stool. So Bruce said not to read notes. I did make some notes. And I learned a lot of this during the pandemic. The pandemic for me, it was fabulous. And it was fabulous because I got to spend time at home, I got to spend time with my dog, and I got to do service work. And I got to learn new skills like Zoom meetings. But I did service work. I shopped for elderly couples that I know who were in total lockdown. I shopped for people who couldn't leave their apartment. They couldn't leave their apartment for a year. And I would do their grocery shopping. When I gave up my business, my prayer was, "God, keep me busy, keep me useful, keep my hands busy, keep me useful." And so God did that for me. I wish I had added, and let me make a little money on the side. But God's not about money. Today on Facebook, one of our members posted something wonderful. He said, "I'm looking for my pink cloud again." And I guess he's had a rough patch. I reached out to him. And for me, that pink cloud, that was so wonderful. It was hope. I came to a meeting, I left that meeting, and I had that sense I wasn't going to have to drink and drug again. And that's the miracle. That is the thing I do not understand. If I understood how I could go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, sit in a chair for 1 hour, I could go in desperately needing alcohol every day, and I could leave and not had a drink or drug since. I'd be a circuit speaker and I'd have, podcasts. I don't know how the miracle works, but the miracle worked. I surrendered that. God took that compulsion away from me, and it happened very, very quickly. Alcohol immediately. The drugs took a little longer. Somebody on Facebook today spoke about being happy, joyous, and free. With my neighbor who is homophobic, I just want to be happy, joyous, and free of him. So I've worked with my sponsor. That's the other thing. When I got sober, I had this desperate need to talk to my sponsor. And he would say things like, "Bradley, have you taken a shower today?" And I said, "No." And he'd say, "Take a shower, get dressed, and call me." I needed that. I spoke to him several times a day for a few weeks. I work with my sponsor today, and I don't have secrets with him. I tell him what's up, and usually it's me surrendering more of my ego. Do you want to be a little tussle with this guy, or do you want to be free and happy and joyous? That's why I've chewed on the big book. Because I've had to do things in sobriety that aren't easy. We've all had to do things that are not easy. Let me tell you about the hardest thing I've ever done. Amelia Bowman was my sponsor. She's gone now. And I have been, in my life, through therapy. I have had existential things. I have done workshops on my late father. He was alive then. And she said to me, "I want you to get a toothbrush, and I want you to scrub your side of the street with one more fourth step, and I'll hear it." And I said, "Amelia, I have done it dozens of times." And she said, "Yeah, it hasn't worked, has it?" So, I do this fourth step, and I get it all out, and I'm in dread. She heard my fifth step in Lee Park at a bench, and it's like 5 pages. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to have to make amends to this man. And she said, "You have one amends to make." And I said, which one? And she told me, and I'm like, "Oh, that was before I drank. It was so small." And she said, "Yeah, but you've thought about it since you've been 17 years old." And so I prayed, and God opened the window, God opened the door. I made the amends to my father on the phone. He didn't want to hear it. He had no interest in it. But I was free of the man, and my life changed. And after that amends, I found myself in a very satisfying relationship. So she referred me to the 12 and 12. And so if you're troubled by a lingering issue in your life, it's on page 79 of step 8. And it's about making amends to people who have done far worse to us than we've ever done to them. Though in some cases we cannot make restitution at all, in some cases action ought to be deferred, we should nevertheless make an accurate and really exhaustive survey of our past life as it's affected other people. In many instances, we shall find that though the harm done others has not been great. The emotional harm we have done ourselves has. Very deep, sometimes quite forgotten. Damaging emotional conflicts persist below the level of consciousness. At the time of these occurrences, they may actually have given our emotion violent twists, which have since discolored our personalities and altered our lives for the worse. And, that was the word, making that amends to that man was the worst thing that ever happened. I will tell you, he's been dead almost 10 years, and I don't think about him. I just don't think about him. I was at a meeting with some people, and they were adding numbers, and my father taught me to read numbers upside down across the table. And so I'm like, your math is off. And they're like, how did you do that? I'm like, my father taught me that. I've had to reach for the things that have been worthwhile. There weren't many, but there were some. The last thing I want to say is, I've always had to control as an alcoholic, and I've always had to know the end result. If I do this, what's going to happen? Well, that doesn't work very well. I do things, sometimes I don't know what's going to happen sometimes. And years ago in New York, I was sober a few months, and I was having a really rough day, and I'd go to a morning meeting, it still exists, at Citicorp Center in the basement, the sub-basement of St. Peter's Church in the Citicorp Center. And there was a woman, Dorothy, and she was a secretary. We now call them executive assistants, but she was the secretary to a CEO of a company in New York. And she was really delightful. And she told us one day she was just out of it, and she went to work the day before, and she just kept praying, God, show me what to do today. God, show me what to do today. And her boss came out of his office and said, hey, Dorothy, how about opening the mail today? And I've never forgotten that it's those little things that get us on the path. But I'm in New York, it's the end of the day, and I'm not in a good place. And I run into Dorothy on the street, and she says, what are you doing? I said, it's not a great day. And she said, come on uptown, I'm headed to a meeting. So we get on the city bus, we talk, we go to the meeting, I leave the meeting, I'm safe for another 24 hours from drinking because of that meeting. I learn months later, she didn't live uptown. She just knew where that meeting was, and that's how she got me on the bus to get me to a meeting. She had not planned to go to that meeting, and I've never forgotten that. And I hope for all of us, there are things we do here, and we don't know what the end result is going to be. Think of the sponsors you've had that are gone. My sponsors who are gone, they've said things to me I have remembered. I have a friend in New York, and I said, you said this to me, and it really saved my life. And they're like, that's the most screwed up thing. I would never say that to anyone. But we're just all God's kids trying to get home. We're just all trying to get home. We're trying to be sober another day. We just all have to give ourselves a break. We have to stop stepping on our own necks. And we're not perfect, we're human. This program has made my life so rich. It has really been a joy for me. And I'm sober today because it's easier for me to be sober today than it is to be drunk today. And I hope you all find that true. Welcome to the people starting out. Welcome to the people coming back. We're glad you're here. Thanks very much.